Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
Whenever a new model gets released, the expectation should always be improvement. And in the case of these brand new Umbro boots, the improvement is significant, which is great to see because I'd love Umbro to start doing well again. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Umbro Toco 4 Pro, the 4th generation of a line of football boots you've probably never heard of. And I guess to fill you in on the history of this line, up until this point, it's been pretty awful. With Umbro definitely having good intentions and even some interesting ideas with the first 3 generations, but unfortunately the overall execution, fit, feel, and performance of the football boot, not to mention the price, all being well behind the pace. Fortunately, the 4th time around, they got a lot of things right, with this easily being the best modern Umbro football boot that I've worn in a couple years now, with the Toco concept effectively being the same as something like the Nike Tiempo Legend. However, unlike the Nike alternative, these actually utilize natural leather for the upper rather than synthetic. It's not all good news though, because while this might look like an attractive Tiempo alternative coming from a brand that hasn't been very popular in the world of football boots for quite some time, you might expect them to be less expensive than a pair of Nikes, but unfortunately they're not, with the retail price on this boot being $250, which, believe it or not, is actually $50 less expensive than last year's Toco 3. So with all that info out of the way, there's no tiptoeing around it. Is the Umbro Toco 4 Pro worth anywhere near $250? That's exactly the question that I hope to answer for you in today's video as we go over all the details of the boot, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can actually pick these up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the link down below. And as always, if you enjoy these brutally honest reviews on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. First things first, if you were disappointed in the price tag, what I'm about to say probably isn't going to make things better, because the leather they've used, while it covers the majority of the upper, which I really appreciate, particularly here on the medial side of the foot, and while the leather itself is really soft and gives you that premium touch on the ball, I think this feels to a quality standard that you would expect on a pair of high-end football boots. Unfortunately, it is not kangaroo leather. On Umbro's website, they list the material as performance leather, which basically implies that they don't want to specify what it is because it's not kangaroo leather, which more or less implies that it's likely a calfskin or a cow leather material, because if it was anything more exotic than that, they definitely would have told us what it is specifically. Nonetheless, as I've talked about many times on this channel before, the quality of leather is more so based on the quality of the actual material rather than the type. You can have a calfskin leather upper that is as soft or softer than a kangaroo leather of an inferior quality. And I think what they've actually used here feels incredibly soft and is way more padded than what you're going to find from most modern leather football boots, which I really do think separates this from a lot of the alternatives that are out there right now. If you wanted to compare this to something like a Copa Pure as an example, that calfskin leather is significantly thinner and just lacking in padding when compared to this. Not to say that those aren't really soft football boots, but not only are you getting more of a padded feel here, which also offers a little bit more protection, you're getting more leather in general, making for what I would argue is a more consistent touch on the ball. Speaking of Adidas, the design of this leather upper actually reminds me a little bit of the Adipure 2, for those that can remember that far back, where the leather itself kind of wraps from the inside of the foot and then crosses over top and then tucks underneath. So you have a burrito style tongue that's leather across the top of the foot in kind of the bottom half, but then transitions into a synthetic kind of foam-based material towards the top of the foot with this really premium microfiber liner. An interesting design, and one that, again, I think really makes for a super soft feel on the ball across the majority of the foot, with the only synthetic element, of course, being the lateral side, where you're going to have this thin synthetic material with actual see-through kind of like, I guess, nylon panels that are there to shave as much weight as possible. You're still maintaining kind of Umbro's signature A-frame reinforcement where the synthetic material is positioned, and then you also have a little bit of that with a see-through window here on the medial side as you get closer towards the heel. Again, an area of the foot where you just want some added structure more than anything else. It's also worth noting that on Umbro's website, they list the enhanced grip and water-resistant tech of this particular upper, and as far as extra grip is concerned, it's non-existent. This is a very slick finish to a natural leather material. Basically no nonsense, what you would expect from a natural leather in general. And as far as the water resistance is concerned, is it better than what you would find from a pair of classic Copa Mundials? Absolutely. But is it that different from other leather football boots that I've worn? In my opinion, no. Somewhat unusually, despite the burrito style tongue where laces would typically be a little bit more off-centered, these run directly down the middle, and you can see they have these 3 cutouts in the leather itself to kind of run the laces through to give you that little bit of a smoother finish, which is an interesting idea. Does it actually improve touch on the ball? I guess that's a matter of personal opinion. I personally don't really think it has much of an impact, but the lacing system does run nice and deep, allowing for plenty of adjustability. Despite the burrito style tongue, it does have a little bit more of a traditional feel. I like the fact that it is detached at the top 2 lacing positions on the medial side rather than being completely connected. It just makes the whole break-in process pretty much seamless. There's no discomfort with this, which can often be the case with a lot of burrito style tongue football boots that I've tried in the past. I will say, however, that there is definitely some inconsistency in terms of the boot being super wide and rounded in the forefoot and toe box area, partially because of the super soft leather upper that is definitely going to stretch, and then definitely more structured and slim fitting through the midfoot, but overall still very comfortable. If you're looking for that very responsive feel from your football boots, these definitely don't provide that. They have a little bit more of that kind of wider, less structured feel to them, more so focusing on comfort rather than kind of locked in responsive performance, which isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just a matter of personal preference. For me, I didn't find the fit or lockdown to be sloppy in any way at all. It just isn't an overly tight-fitting football boot. Moving to the rear, not that it really matters because we're not exactly using it as a reference point, but it has been completely redesigned coming from the Toco 3, which was a little bit more on the traditional side. This is obviously a more modern take where you have a hard internal plastic heel counter, these rubber fins that technically will give you a little bit of extra grip on the ball, but it's at the heel, so it's really not that relevant to the overall experience. And then it does extend a little bit higher at the back than I would personally like, where there is a little bit of rubbing I experienced kind of at the Achilles tendon just based on how this is shaped. It reminds me a little bit of what used to be a minor issue on the original Adidas Nemesis, for those that remember the kind of higher back that those had, but it is something that once you break the boots in and you get used to it, it's not really an issue. And you can see kind of along the edges, they've given it a mock collar with this almost foam-based microfiber material, super smooth and very soft on the inside of the boot, with really a minimal amount of padding through the heel, which is typically a concern when it comes to overall comfort and lockdown. But because the shaping is pretty straight up and down with minimal padding, I think it will work well for most people, although I did find that the material they used for the liner was a little bit more slippery. So in terms of getting the best possible lockdown from these boots, I would definitely recommend some grip socks to stop your foot from slipping that little bit at the very back. And then the insole, fully removable. I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It features a pretty standard mesh liner on the surface, and it's made from a pretty standard feeling black foam. Nothing really crazy here, especially for 250 bucks. Moving to the base of the Toco 4, like I mentioned earlier, they have recycled the sole plate and stud pattern from previous Toco generations, and as I've expressed in previous reviews, it's not my favorite sole plate, although it doesn't necessarily feel bad either. It's a pretty standard plastic sole plate with this kind of almost wishbone type reinforcement using a stiffer plastic. The issue is the flex point on this sole plate is very much kind of in the midfoot, which makes this feel a little bit stiffer than I think it perhaps should, but at the same time, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, and surprisingly, given how soft and pliable this leather upper is, I didn't find it to be a super noticeable element of actually playing in these football boots. So it has a nice solid feel underfoot, and that's kind of where I want to leave it, because I didn't have any major issues with it. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, it's a pretty standard layout, very similar to what you're going to find from the Adidas brand, but all conical studs that are fairly small in profile and definitely on the shorter side. So if you play on firm natural grass, which this is technically an FG stud pattern, but the grass is a little bit softer, these studs are on the shorter side and may not be ideal for you. But if you play on firm ground that trends towards being hard ground, this is kind of an ideal stud layout in terms of the length of the studs. But in proper conditions for this type of stud pattern, it works really well, as you would expect. Fairly traditional in terms of overall performance, that freedom to twist and pivot, and generally I think it suits this style of football boot decently well. You also get this little toe pick blade right at the tip of the toe, which truthfully I don't think does much of anything. Overall though, it's a decent sole plate and stud pattern in terms of how it feels, but definitely Umbro, if you're watching, if there's going to be a Toco 5, I think it's time for something a little bit better. When it comes to weight, regardless of how good or bad the boots have been, Umbro has always prioritized making the overall construction pretty lightweight when it comes to their top end models. In the case of this particular pair, in a size 9.5 US, you can see that the boots weigh in at 7.3 ounces, the equivalent of 207 grams, which is actually on the lighter side of most top-end football boots. So despite its arguably chunkier look because of the padded leather that you have on the majority of the upper, they're lighter than some flagship speed boots. On feet, the Toco 4s are actually pretty comfortable. The leather that you get through the forefoot and midfoot is super soft and flexible, and despite the sole plate definitely feeling on the stiffer side in hand, that doesn't necessarily translate to the on-foot feel for whatever reason. The lacing system allows for plenty of adjustability, and you definitely feel like your midfoot gets locked in. However, the thin synthetic through the midfoot, as secure as it feels on the outside, because the leather kind of wraps into the midfoot on the medial side, the boot as a whole doesn't necessarily have that super secure feel. It has a little bit of a wider, higher volume sensation, making it feel more traditional than perhaps Umbro would have wanted, but that does translate into a very comfortable sensation, in that it's not one of those football boots that feels like it's squeezing your foot in any type of uncomfortable way. So definitely a matter of personal preference. If you want that squeezing sensation, you're not getting it here, but if you like that traditional feel, I think this is a very comfortable take on a leather boot with some modern elements. The heel would be my one complaint here, where again, the back does come up a little bit high for my liking, and I wish there was a little bit more padding through the heel. The liner material itself, probably due to the lack of padding, does end up feeling a little bit slippery, so some grip socks to prevent any kind of extra movement is definitely advisable for a pair of football boots like this. From a width perspective, like I mentioned, they do have lots of width and volume to them, particularly because that leather is going to stretch, but also because the base shape is not particularly narrow. You can see how these are laced up. So for really wide feet, I think these are going to be great. If you had super narrow feet, probably not going to be the best option. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in a size 10 rather than my usual 9.5, so half a size bigger. And that's because I've been finding that over the years, Umbros have been running a little bit small, between half or a quarter size, and that seems to be the case with the Toco 4 Pro as well. In a size 10 US, my toe is right at the end, as it typically would be in a 9.5. So as long as you're not wearing your boots with a ton of extra space at the moment, if you were by chance interested in these or any other Umbros, I would personally recommend going half a size up in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, to give my glass half full perspective of the Umbro Toco 4 Pro, is that it's by far the best Umbro football boot that I've worn in the last couple years, and certainly a product that gets a pass as far as wearability is concerned if you're a fan of slightly more traditional feeling and fitting leather football boots. Unfortunately, I also have a glass half empty perspective, and if I'm being honest with you guys, as much as I think these are okay football boots, for $250, I just expect more than okay. In other words, for as good as I think they are, for $130, the New Balance 442 version 2 Pro is just as good, if not better. Not to mention all the other options that you'd have with a budget of $250.